Okay, on to Keats then. What do you need to know about Keats that's really important? Okay, well, first of all, if you look at the dates that are given to you there, 1795 to 1821, you'll see that he died extremely young. And a lot of his poetry is actually infused with death and illness, because at a young age he developed TB, tuberculosis, and often associated love with death and used a lot of the imagery of death because he had this acute awareness that he would die young. La Belle Dame sans merci obviously means the beautiful woman without mercy. It's a ballad, which means that it was designed to be sung. Now, Keats was one of the key members of the Romantics and is often considered in many ways the most archetypal of the Romantics, okay? Why was that? Because he believed very much in the power of art and the power of nature. And the Romantics tended to turn from the world, and they tended to want to build a very imaginative universe. And in particular, they loved things like folk tales, and they loved the idea of a medieval world. So some of you are already familiar perhaps with Samuel Coleridge Taylor. You might know the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. You might know that a lot of the Romantics went back to Arthurian legends and to a medieval world. And in some ways they did this because at the time, as I'm sure you're aware, looking at those dates, Britain was industrializing very fast. And they kind of wanted to retreat from the modern world and retreat into an older, imaginative world. And they often created a very mythical medieval world in which there was more stability. However, in this particular ballad we're going to look at, that's not the case. This seems to be to fit into the paradigm of love as killing you, love as a sickness, which is often a narrative used. And in this particular case, it seems to come out of the chivalric tradition. You may have looked at Petrarch and the idea that love is fatal. Now, I know you've all studied Romeo and Juliet, and you will know that Romeo uses this conceit all of the time, saying, love has killed me. When he first speaks of Rosaline, he talks about her as Diane, as the goddess of archery, who shoots him and wounds him and hurts him. So, interestingly enough, we will study quite a few poems and literary texts where women are represented as the victims of male love. You know, if we think about, what's the poem called? Let me get it quickly. The Scrutiny by Richard Lovelace. You'll see that's about a man who makes love to a woman and abandons her, isn't it? And you could argue that that is actually more of a common narrative. But in La Belle Dame sans merci, we're going to have a male victim, aren't we? A victim of a kind of a siren or dark woman who, and by dark I don't mean in terms of colour, I mean morally, who enjoys and plays with male love. And so here we have a version of love which is sort of fatal to poor old men. Okay, so we've done some context, and I'm going to move now, hopefully seamlessly, to the poem. But not so seamlessly, because very unwisely, I'm on the wrong page. Okay, here we are. We're ready to start again. Okay, so it's a ballad, which means that it is going to be very metrical, and it is designed to be sung, okay? You will notice that it has a longer line and a shorter line, okay? And in some ways, I think the shorter line, you could say, creates a feeling of instability, confusion, or uncertainty. And the poem begins with an anonymous person questioning the knight. And she says, "Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing." So immediately we get the use of the pathetic fallacy, don't we? Sedge is a kind of water reed, and so the dehydration of the scene, the witheredness and the lack of birds is the pathetic fallacy that is used to show the knight's spiritual condition. We're meant to see that nature and love are intimately connected, and here the death of nature is representative of the knight's spiritual and emotional condition. He's sickening and dying. And there's sadness and lamentation in terms of the questioner, because she can see how affected he is. Again, we have the, "Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest is done." So it's important that it's identified at the end of year with the coming of winter, isn't it? And here the conceit of winter, again, is meant to show the kind of barrenness, etc. In winter you're meant to bed down and seek refuge, aren't you? But the knight is wandering aimlessly, lost in a kind of daze of love. So I want to remind you that one of the representations of love is this idea of sickness and disease. But here as well, it seems to have an added connotation of being hypnotized, to being stunned emotionally, unable to actually focus and return to a meaningful life. And the speaker then goes on to use more imagery. "I see the lily on thy brow." The lily is, of course, the pale flower of death and the personification of fever and illness. "With anguish moist and fever dew, and thy cheeks a fading rose, fast withereth too." So here we see the combination of flowers with the knight's features, and we see that he is actually sickening and dying. So remember I said to you, here is a representation of men as the victim of love. In many ways, the knight has become quite a feminine character. He is, if we associate knights with being warriors and lovers and rescuing damsels in distress, here he is more of a kind of Samson character. You'll recall in the Bible, Samson was the great, strong hero of the Israelites, who was reduced to sickness by Delilah and her love. So we have this kind of idea that love can be a terribly damaging thing that reduces male virility, masculinity, health, etc. So the first three stanzas, all of which are very regular as we see, are all that of questioning, asking, and lamenting. And it is by, as I said, this unknown speaker. So what happens then in stanza 4? The knight gets to tell his story. "I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child." One of the key things I want you to realize here is that the fairies today have become like little pathetic, little effeminate things like Tinkerbells, haven't they? But you'll notice that Keats uses the archaic spelling of fairy, and I think he's using the archaic concept of fairy too. Quite interesting, because fairies, as any of you who know A Midsummer Night's Dream, will know that Puck is quite a vicious character, and that Oberon and Titania are far from being lovely little things. They're actually mischief makers who hurt people and delight in mischief. And I think that those of you who might have watched True Blood on TV more recently will know that fairies are not cast as these sweetie little things. They actually have quite a lot of power. So here, where she's referred to as a fairy's child, we're thinking about the dark connotations of kind of black magic, more like Morgana Le Fay than Tinkerbell. Her hair was long. Now, in medieval poetry, hair is invariably a sexual symbol, because like in Islam in medieval times, women wore their hair covered, and the lowering of hair was seen as a kind of act of sexuality and erotica. Her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. So in many ways, she's kind of quite a frightening female archetype, isn't she? She's light, physically weak, at the same time as being incredibly strong because of this ability to hypnotize and to really control his mind. And in this sense, she is a siren. Some of you will know the female siren, or the beautiful naked woman who lived in the sea, who would sing to sailors and lure them to their death. yeah? So there's kind of fear. Now, from a feminist perspective, is very interesting, because there's a long tradition of men fearing female power and cursing women for the power of attraction that they have over them. And you'll notice that he behaves in true knightly fashion. He does all the wonderful chivalric things. He makes a garland for her head. He makes bracelets. And he makes a fragrant zone. Kind of quite interesting. It's artistic and quite feminine in many ways, isn't it? He's kind of prostrated himself before her and given her his tokens of love. She looked at me as she did love and made sweet moan. Well, very erotic and sexual kind of idea there. And Keats is famous for his love of sensuality, etc. In other poems, you might want to look at the Eve of St. Agnes. Keats loves the idea of highly sensual and erotic language, okay? And you'll notice she looked at me as she did love, as she did love. Seems to me that he's implying there that she's a good actress and that she knows how to act as though she's in love. Now, moving on to stanza number 6. I set on my pacing steed. You'll notice a big change in rhythm. And nothing else saw all day long, for sideways would she bend and sing a fairy song. So this beautiful rhythmic stanza here is interesting, because now he's completely in her power, is he not? And it quickens, partly I think to show the song, the flowiness of the song, but also to show his absolute dedication to her. And you'll notice it mixes then. On the one hand, she's hypnotized him with her song, her siren-like song. But to add to that, she finds him roots of relish sweet, honey wild, and manna dew. Now, this is something that Anna was referring to earlier. Manna was the food sent from God in the Bible to the Jews who were dying in the desert, and it tasted delicious. But roots also, some of you will know from Macbeth, have this connotation of being a psychotropic drug that change your mind. Now, of course, there's a long-held Greek myth that those who tasted ambrosia, or the food of the gods, afterwards would sicken and die. For once you've tasted the food of the gods, you can never eat human food again. And so there's this kind of idea here, this elevation, which is strictly in keeping with chivalric or Petrarchan love, that women are treated as saintly, as godlike figures. But in this case, she is playing and toying with him, isn't she? And she's taken him into this dangerous, surreal realm where he loses all sense of himself. And sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. Almost like she can speak a magical language which entrances him. So, very strong female power. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild eyes with kisses four. So, in her wild grot, as some kind of physical coupling occurs, it's all very sensual, isn't it, with the W's that suggest kind of erotic abandonment. And there's a lovely kind of idea of sexuality and sleep that goes together, the extinguishing of consciousness into some kind of sensual bliss that occurs. So you've got your wild W's, and that leads into stanza 9, where you have your lovely liquids lulled, and words like asleep and dreamed. So you go into this kind of dream state, okay? And this is basically the height of his sensual pleasure, isn't it, in stanza 9. But notice, he says, the latest dream I dreamt on the cold hillside. So mid-stanza, we have the marked Susura there, you'll notice. And what happens? He moves from this sleep, this lulled sleep, this gentle sleep, and wakes onto the cold hillside. And so the poem now is severed, isn't it? From that sensual and erotic joy, we are going to go into all different types of sounds and all different types of imagery. And it's signaled by this phrase here. Notice this is a very broken line, isn't it? Because you have the susura in the middle of the line. You have the gasp, ah, woe betide. We all know that that is a phrase, isn't it, of horror or negativity. Another susura, and this is where he wakes up on the cold hillside. And that rhyme there is quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because, as I say, that helps to sever the poem into these two bits, doesn't it? And here's where he has his dream. Here his dream seems to have been one of complete extinguishment of consciousness, isn't it? That comes after this kind of erotic pleasure. But now he's actually going to see the fate. And we realize that he is representative of what happens to many men. So you could argue this is quite a misogynistic poem, couldn't you? In which women are the ruin of men. And of course that's quite biblical, isn't it? You have the whole idea of Eve spoiling the Garden of Eden and causing the fall. As I said to you, you have Samson and Delilah. You have the idea of the sirens in Greek mythology, don't you? And so there's this idea that women can exert power through love, and that can destroy men. Now, I saw pale kings. Well, that's almost an oxymoron, isn't it? King being a powerful, masculine idea, and here pale, of course, denoting sickness, etc. Princes too, so you've got the strong plosives, pale warriors, death pale. All of those plosives really emphasize, don't they, how many and how reduced all of these people are. And they speak with one voice, don't they? La Belle Dame sans merci, thee hath enthralled. So in the dream, they all speak to him and warn him. In some ways, you can't call it a warning because it's too late. It's like her love is a poison, and now he will have a lingering death. I saw the starved lips in the gloam with horrid warning gape. Now, I find it quite interesting because, again, it's like they have some kind of anorexia. So it's quite a feminine imagery, isn't it? Yeah. And so love here is frequently, if you wanted to see a pattern in the imagery, it's frequently that masculinity is turned into weak femininity, isn't it? And here they are starved in the gloam as well. So you have the fading light, a very old word, an archaism again, showing this kind of wish for the ballad form, for medievalism, for archaism. With horrid warning gaped. Now gaped is a wonderful word, isn't it? Because it means to be wide open. So it's like one of those hideous medieval paintings in which you see the suffering people of hell. And I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. You'll notice that there's repetition throughout the poem, and that's a key feature of the ballad, isn't it? Yeah? And this is our concluding stanza, isn't it? And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake and no birds sing. So the end of it, of course, is basically you have the night waiting for death. It returns in terms of imagery to the beginning, to the sedge, to the black of birds singing. Here nature has been robbed of all fertility, energy, and life, and we see that the night is waiting for death. So, to conclude, we have this idea that love has stricken this poor knight. That the lady, La Belle Dame sans merci, has done it, we don't know why, but it seems to be because she enjoys the power that she has over him. He seems to speak for a whole long line of men who have been tortured by her and her kiss and her love. And it's very much a kind of within, very similar, isn't it, to non sum, in the sense that it's the kind of love that this man can never escape. He's enjoyed this erotic, intense moment, and now forever he's in the grip of it. In Ernest Dowson's poem, of course, he tries to get rid of it by sleeping with prostitutes, etc. He does everything he can to extinguish it by drunkenness, by wine. In the knight's case, in La Belle Dame sans merci, it's a quieter death. He doesn't fight it, does he? He waits, starving himself, in this very bleak environment, for death.